Involving your whole family in learning about health, healthy cooking, and healthy living is one of our greatest privileges. It's our opportunity to make sure the next generation knows how to navigate a world with so much going against their health. We have the chance to leave a legacy of health for our kids. Part of that legacy is making sure our teens have an adequate skill set that they can take with them into adulthood. My guest today, Katie Kimball, has been focused on teaching families and kids cooking skills and healthy habits for many years, and I'm excited that she's now here joining me on the show to share her tips. You'll gain helpful strategies to get your teens more involved in the kitchen, strategies to deal with picky eaters, and strategies to foster health confidence in your family. Katie is also offering a generous free gift, which you can find in the show notes after you listen. It's our mission here at Daily Wellness to make sure that many families have the ability to leave a legacy of health. One way that you can help us do that is just to share this podcast episode with a friend and leave a 5-star rating on the platform that you're listening on. We really appreciate your support. Welcome to the Daily Wellness Podcast. I'm your host, Melissa Meredith. I've led my family on a transformative health journey for over a decade, and now I help other families do the same. This is a place where busy moms can learn about healthy living. I hope that what you learn here helps you feel empowered to take the next step in your family's health journey. Katie, thank you so much for joining me.
Of course, always a pleasure.
Yeah, I just told you before we started recording that I have been following your blog for a long time. You've been an inspiration and kind of mentor to me in my own family's health journey for a long time. One thing that I really admire about your work is that you focus on the whole family. So I know a lot of times, moms will be kind of on their own health journey or they will start making healthier choices for their kids. And it's not often integrated. And so I love that you provide resources and tools for the whole family, includes everyone. So what was it that really sparked a passion for kind of whole family health for you?
Well, I'm a teacher by trade. So since I was in preschool, I knew I was going to be an elementary teacher. And, unlike many kids who change their mind a lot from Batman to police officer to whatever their real job becomes, that is actually what I became. And so I always think through the mind of an educator and also like the child and what would be best for the child. And so it just kind of makes sense. My whole mission has been to help people be in balance. And so it's hard to be in balance if the whole family isn't learning together and isn't eating together. And when I think about holistic health or like functional health, we look at the whole body instead of just my cardiologist says this and my gastroenterologist says this, and like they're unrelated. It seems just as foolish for one person to be completely on their own health journey and leaving their family in their dust.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I'm sure as a mom, you were learning things for yourself and, why not apply that to your kids, right?
Yeah, plus a lot of people in my community, like you said, I've been around a while. So 2009 is when I hopped online and thought I can help people find balance and, not go crazy in the kitchen. Um, since the beginning, I've heard a lot of moms say, Katie, I really want to get healthy, but this is so hard because my mom never taught me to cook. And so to me, that's a story with a cycle because now that we're the moms, if we aren't teaching our kids to cook, if we aren't teaching them healthy habits now, they're going to have the same problem and the same mountain to climb when they're the grown-ups. And so it just made so much sense for me to step in to that gap and not only talk about whole family health and picky eating and how to get the kids, having healthy habits, but also how to get them cooking so that they can continue those healthy habits. And I mean, it's kind of a vision I had even in my own family. Like we were eating healthily, but when my oldest was about 10, I realized that I hadn't really taught him much in the kitchen since we added to our family and life got more chaotic. It was easy to bring him in the kitchen when he was like 2 and he was the only extra person in my space. But the more kids we have, the harder that became for me, and I deprioritized it. And so that my wake up call was when he was 10, and I thought, great, like if he knows how to eat salad and he has these habits of eating healthy foods, but he doesn't have knife skills to unlock the produce section, he'll be the 18-year-old at college like, "Oh, well, I guess it's ramen noodles and frozen pizza," or like spending all my money on, convenience healthy food, right? Like paying for someone else to cut up your vegetables is expensive. And he's very cheap. And I knew that when and he's 19 now. He still doesn't like to spend money. So it was a realization to me like, oh my goodness, My kids need all the tools. They need the habits of healthy eating and the tools of cooking.
Yeah, I've also loved getting my kids in the kitchen, and I can totally relate with you when you said I deprioritized getting my kids in the kitchen and teaching them to cook. What was it and what did it look like that got you back in the kitchen?
Well, it was when my son was 10. He was doing it called a how-to speech in 4th grade, and he was teaching his class how to make homemade guacamole. I brought the chef's knife in, so I was one of the few parents who got to see it, and you can't just send a chef's knife in a 4th grader's backpack, it doesn't fly. So I got to watch it, and it was such a fun moment when he used that knife, like, thwacked the pit out of the avocado, and there were a few other adults in the room like, look at the gas, like, "Oh my gosh, small child with big knife." And so I'm like, "That's cool," like, I feel very proud of my kid, but at the same time, homemade guacamole was the only recipe he knew how to make, and he'd been jamming with that one since he was in 1st grade, and I thought, "Oh, like, I haven't done anything for 4 years with him in the kitchen." I was kinda riding the coattails of this one fantastic recipe that he could make.
Right.
And it was that realization, and just, I was over the halfway point of the 18-year parenting game too, and so you start to think like, I'm 10 years out of 18, it's
Mhm.
55% here. What am I gonna do with the rest of the time? And that was my big
Yeah.
realization.
Did you start, like, assigning him meals to cook, or what did that look like?
Not meals right away. I'm a big proponent of breaking steps down into, like, component pieces, and so I started I mean, I'm an educator, right? I'm a teacher, and so I created the curriculum, like, I started thinking, "What are the building blocks that we need?" If I'm gonna teach a child to make muffins, well, they have to know how to measure with teaspoons, measure flour, they crack eggs, stir to uniform mixture, use the oven, right? There's like 7 or 8 skills in the art of baking muffins, and so I decided to teach my kids those skills. So we actually took that summer after the famous how-to speech in 4th grade, and I let each of my kids invite a friend, partly because I wanted it to be fun for them, but mostly because that was my life hack to get myself to do it.
Mm.
Because I will never miss an appointment. I'll never miss an interview, something real in my calendar, right? But if I, like, write in my calendar, 10 a.m. on Mondays, I'm gonna do cooking with my kids, it's, like, totally optional. You know what I mean? Like, I don't treat myself and my own appointments with as much respect as I do other people. So I thought, if our neighbors have 10 a.m. on Monday morning cooking class at the Kimballs in their calendar, Katie's gonna be ready. I will have the supplies, I will have a general idea of what I'm gonna teach, and so that's kinda how I hacked it for myself. We just did some little cooking skills each week that summer and put them together then to make recipes. It wasn't until, so Paul was 10 at that age. We count by 3s in our family, so my kids are 10, 7, and 4 at that time, and, when my oldest 2 were 9 and 12, they did start taking over a meal.
Mm. Wow. That's amazing. I love that. That's such a good hack. I might steal that.
Oh, do it. The outside accountability was necessary for me.
Yes, that's so fun, and I think it would make a fun atmosphere where everybody, can kinda giggle at each other and learn together. The kids will have such a fun memory of that too.
Yeah, yeah, well, and so at the end of that summer is when we filmed the Kids Cook Real Food e-course, and so those friends are the extra kids who don't belong to me that are in the course, and so they're, like, forever immortalized, but now they're, like, junior high and high school kids, so it's so funny to look back at those videos.
Too cute, yeah. So, I mean, you started blogging in 2009, right? And I'm sure that you were thinking about health even before then. So you're probably like 20 some years or something into a health journey. That's a lot of wisdom gained over the years. As you look back kind of on some of that time and reflect, like what are some of the most impactful changes that you have made for your family?
Oh, you're right in saying that it's about 20 years, because the very first change I made first of all, I did not really care about health, only
Mm.
budget, when I became a grown-up but didn't have kids yet,
Yeah.
right? It was just budget and time, and so we were doing hamburger helper, bagged salad, bottled dressing, like, cheap stuff. Um, and so when I became pregnant, the first thing I Googled was, "What do you eat when you're pregnant?" I was
Mm.
just so overwhelmed with the thought that I'm fully responsible for another human being, and we found the Bradley birth classes, which are 12 2-hour classes. My husband gets a parenting award for, like, toiling through those, and they teach some nutrition stuff, and so the very first change I made was just margarine to butter.
Mm,
That was it. I was like, "Margarine's not good for me? What?" Like, I was raised on Bluebonnet. So so it's hard to think of the big changes because they were all little changes, if that
mm.
makes sense. Like,
Yeah.
yes, some are probably bigger than others. I think some of the more impactful ones would be including more fresh produce.
Mm,
So I grew up with my mom being what I call a hybrid cook, meaning she did cook from scratch, most definitely. But a lot of meat and potatoes, kind of old world type dishes, and she made homemade spaghetti sauce, but it started with 2 cans of Campbell's Cream of Tomato soup, right? So it's like this weird hybrid of homemade and
yeah.
processed food. And so she had never crushed a clove of garlic. She had never bought a bell pepper, and so when I started expanding my repertoire of produce, like, she actually learned from reading my blog, which is so funny,
Mm,
like, teaching up the ladder, up the generational ladder. So, definitely expanding the amount and variety of fresh produce I used
mm,
was huge. And then I think just what I would call examining grains. So we
mm,
did a lot of different forays, like what is it like to go gluten-free or what is it like to go grain-free and how are grains sort of impacting the different biologies in the family. I don't think oats are my friend, but I didn't realize that till my late 30s. Like, oh, I just feel ugh every time I have oatmeal. Now, does that mean
mm,
I never have oatmeal? No, sometimes I do. But it's usually a special occasion, like a special baked oatmeal or, like, I really want some granola. But just that ability to, like, start to listen to the body
mhm,
is totally different too. I don't think in the '80s and '90s, when most of us were raised, we were told, "Listen to your body, you know, the food is fuel and food affects the way you feel." It was more like, "Well, do you have a tummy ache because you ate too much?" Like, that was it. Not like, "We have a tummy ache, I wonder if it's dairy, or I wonder if it's gluten." You know what I mean? Like, that was just a foreign language. So, all of that awareness has been huge and has definitely impacted sort of the balance of our meals to this day.
and do you feel like your kids are kind of gleaning from that and learning to listen to their own bodies as well?
Yeah, in fact, I'm really proud of my 16-year-old daughter. This must not be because I said it because she doesn't listen to me. So someone else told her protein is important. And she can articulate at this point. She says, if I don't have protein in the
Mm,
morning by 10 a.m., I'm starving, like my energy is crashing. So even when we have, like, we'll have an oatmeal day or Fridays are cereal granola days in our family. I can always tell, I can smell it when I walk downstairs that she has turned on the stove and she's either cooked herself an egg or some sausage. Oh my gosh, she's 16, like, to me, that's a miracle, right? And so just that awareness of listening to your body, like, if you
yeah.
do nothing else after this conversation, start to use that language with your kids. How does that food make you feel? And thinking about food as fuel, impactful.
Yeah, I'm definitely celebrating with you. I mean, if my kids take initiative to do something healthy for themselves, that is a big win.
It's huge.
Yeah. Another thing I noticed about your work is that you use the word stewardship. It's in your blog title. And so I'm just curious how your faith has impacted your health journey.
It's always been in there. When I started percolating on this idea of how can I help other parents in my situation, that was when I was spending, my son was 1 or less than 1, spending all this time in the kitchen. I'm making tons of mistakes. I'm burning things. I can picture myself turning on a blender to make some like wacky homemade baby food that you had to like grind the dry beans. And I didn't put the lid on the blender. So like half ground chickpeas went all up to the ceiling. Thank goodness they were
Oh, I
dry.
know.
But it's still like I made every mistake possible from the frivolous to the expensive. And so because of that, I thought, how can I help other moms like shorten this path to success? And in all that time, before media was so pervasive, I had a lot of quiet time in the kitchen. And and that word stewardship kept really coming to my heart.
Mm,
That God gives us so many gifts and the
mm,
gift of my baby, my tiny baby. Like I just wanted to be a good steward of his health. But there was that tension, right? Like I can't just spend $1,000 a month on the baby food, and the baby products. So it was like, I need to be a good steward of that budget
Mhm.
too, and I've always had a heart for taking care of the earth since I was a kid in elementary school. So it's like, "Oh,
Mhm.
but we wanna be good stewards of the earth as well, and we need to be good stewards of our time because I've been spending all my time in the kitchen, and I don't see the beautiful faces I'm feeding. Like, I'm not stewarding their growth and our
Mhm.
relationship and our time." So that, to me, is just, it's integral to
Mhm.
our jobs as moms, as wives, as homemakers, as human beings to steward the gifts that God has given us, and there are so many, and sometimes they create tension. When we think about time, budget, nutrition, it's like, which is why I call it kitchen stewardship, because there are these techniques that kind of sit in the middle that can save you time and budget and are super healthy, and so that's what I always focus on as the kitchen stewardship foundations, because they all save sanity as well, which is being a good steward of our own mental health.
Yeah, I mean, well, you kinda started the conversations talking about balance, and that's a little bit of stewardship too, right? Kind of knowing where God wants you to invest your time and energy and money and things like that for that season of life. So do you feel like you have been able to kinda get to a place where, you can eat healthy on a budget and you're not, sacrificing all the time with your kids to be in the kitchen all the time?
Yes and no. I remember hearing, I believe he's like a professional photographer for National Geographic, and he was talking about balance using the idea of literally standing on like a balance board. And he points out that it's not that you ever stand still,
Mm.
right? You ever had like one of those like wobble
Yeah.
boards or whatever? It's not that you're ever stock still. You're constantly tweaking, adjusting those muscles and initiating, you're in balance, but you're always working. And I thought that's so perfect because there are phases of life where I have to save time and I'll spend money to do so. And
Mhm.
there are phases of life where it's like, "Oh, nope, it is budget time. We have to focus on the budget," which might mean we spend more time. And so it's a constant balancing act. I will say, preface by saying, do not compare your beginning to my end or my 75% or wherever I'm at. I do have 3 kids who make a meal a week. So, and a husband who makes a meal a week. So I only make 3 dinners a week, which definitely eases the schedule and the mental load
That's
a little bit.
amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. And how has it been kind of finding the balance of budget in food specifically? Because I know a lot of people will kind of hesitate to try and be more healthy with their food or lifestyle because they have a thought that this is going to be too expensive. I'm not going to be able to afford this. You have any tips for people that are struggling with that barrier?
In this arena, I think knowledge is power. So the more you understand about where the nutrient density is, the more you can make better decisions on where to spend the money. So a
Mhm.
lot of people think like this. They go, "I'm going to get healthier, so I'm gonna start buying all organic."
Mm.
And if that's your first step, your budget is busted, right? Like, it's done. But if you actually wanna say, "Okay, I'm gonna eat healthier, where can I make the most impactful changes for the least amount of money?" That takes some knowledge as far as, what genuinely nourishes our body. I would rather have someone buy, conventional ground beef than grass-fed ground beef if that allows them to then buy a bunch of vegetables as well,
Mm.
if that makes sense. Or I'd rather have someone buy conventional ground beef rather than, organic, highly processed, easy to make sausages. Does that make sense? So the more you understand about, like, what's actually in your food and where you can pull out some of that nutrient density. So my 3 favorite techniques are making homemade broth, homemade bone broth, using dry beans, and making homemade yogurt. And I love those because they save a ton of money.
They do.
They take very little time, and they have the ability to kind of pump up your nutrition, especially if those are things that you would do regularly,
Yeah.
right? And so it's like in a math equation almost, like you input what you eat the most, you input where the greatest nutrient density is, and then you input whatever your budget is. So for me, oh my goodness, making bone broth is like pennies. It's so easy, especially the more you do it, like, it's just part of my routine now. In fact, I went to the freezer the other day and I was like, "I only have 2 jars of broth? What is wrong with me?" But I had a bunch of bags of bones, so it was like, "Okay, well, instead of thawing the broth,
Mhm.
I'm just gonna, make some broth overnight in the Instant Pot for tomorrow's soup." And so because I have all that, like, experience, right? Where
Mm.
it's like riding a bike, it's not hard anymore. I just get on. But if I'm making big, huge batches of soup, I have massive leftovers. It's infinitely budget friendly. And I know that that nutrient density is huge. In fact, when you combine like small amounts of meat with bone broth, the meat that you're using actually, how do I say this? Like it's called a protein sparer. So you can eat less meat and still get the benefits as if you're eating more meat. So that's a massive budget shift right there.
Yeah, definitely. Have you also found that being intentional to buy real food and being intentional to buy the nutrient dense foods has also saved you money from health bills?
That's the hope, right? I mean, we can't, I always wish I could A B test our lives. Right? Like, what if we had just not cared and, like, drank all the soda and ate convenience
Mhm.
food and, like, didn't cook from scratch?
Mm.
I mean, my hunch is that we wouldn't be doing as well, and partly I can look around the world. You know, I can look at friends and neighbors who are struggling with chronic disease. We can look at statistics, but that's definitely my hope is that as every decade goes by, I spend less time in the doctor's office than other people.
Yeah. I can see that a little bit for myself. I started kind of when my kids were 3 and 5, and we had a lot of those toddler, doctor office visits, where they had ear infections and different things going on, and so that definitely occurred less for us as we switched and started to be more intentional with our food. But you started with a baby, so I see you don't have that, like, comparison exactly.
Not exactly, but I mean, child number 1 was definitely raised differently than the others. So I have
Yeah.
4 kids currently, just to paint the picture. They're 19, 16, 13, and 10. And my 3 younger kids have never had antibiotics. But my oldest, I mean, he had them at birth and probably 5 other times. So that's right there is a huge difference.
Yeah.
Which one struggles with eczema? The one who had all the antibiotics. Is that related? It's impossible to say for sure, but I always wonder. And so
Mm.
and so I can definitely look at that my kids in that way and think that we've made some big changes. Also, when I married my husband, he had Crohn's disease, which is a chronic autoimmune disease. And I would like to put chronic in air quotes because it's no longer on his chart
Wow.
for just diet and lifestyle reasons. Like his last colonoscopy, the doctor was like, "Yeah, I can see where you had surgery. I can see where it was stitched up and it's a little inflamed, but I see no evidence of Crohn's disease." And so,
That is amazing.
humongous savings there.
Yeah, that is amazing. I love that. And so in your journey with your kids, with helping your husband heal, all the things you have advocated for these small steps. What are some small steps that you would recommend people start with? Because I know that's also a barrier. It's just like feeling all overwhelmed with all the options.
Yeah, I mean, well, I mentioned my favorite 3, which are learning bone broth, using dry beans, and making homemade yogurt. Those are small, medium steps, right? Because you have to learn something new. So for me, the very first small steps are the ones where you just switch an ingredient.
Mhm.
So my example of moving from margarine to butter. Okay, or maybe changing from, canola oil or corn oil to avocado or olive or coconut oil. Does that make it's like it's just you're switching the product and you're not having to, like, change your life, just change your grocery list. I'm a sunscreen geek. So as far as when we think, what we feed our skin is like what is as important as what we feed our mouths. And so for me, like, I always tell people, like, switching the sunscreen, it's not that hard. Like, you're just buying a different thing, and maybe you have to, like, put it on a little differently because the zinc sunscreen can be a little more white, but there's great brands now, and so for me, that's what I would say is, like, look at what you're eating and find 1 thing or 2 things where you can swap a better ingredient.
Yeah.
Focus on something that you use often, daily, right? And so, like, for some people, maybe that's, like, white bread to whole wheat bread, or maybe it's whole wheat bread to, "Oh, let's experiment with gluten-free." I don't know. It just depends what you're what God is telling you to do, right? Like, where's God nudging you? And maybe look and go, "In my pantry, in my fridge, is there something that makes me feel a little squeamish every time it comes out?" Like, "Ah, girl, you probably shouldn't have that." So, just tell yourself, "When that one's gone, I won't buy it again." And then you'll figure it out. "Well, what do I do? What do I do when they want that thing?" I don't know. You'll figure it out when it's not there.
Yep. And life goes on.
Yeah. Yeah.
We have a moment of like, wait, we don't have that anymore. And then, the next day comes and it's all fine.
Yeah, you should be as long but don't like, unless you have the certain personality, don't look at your pantry and go, "Oh, 27 things I will now get rid of," or like half of it. Because generally that's when you like hit rock bottom and you go, "I don't know what to do. I'm just gonna go buy it all again."
Yeah. Other than taking small steps, do you have any advice for parents wanting to make healthy changes?
I love having the convenience meal plan.
Mm,
So if this applies to you, like if you're a family where like the day is crazy, your plan has fallen apart, it's suddenly dinner time and your roast isn't thawed or you forgot to start the Instant Pot or, right? You name it, things happen. I like to have convenience foods in my house so that I don't fall back on ordering pizza or takeout. Partly
mhm.
because that's not usually the level of nutrition I want. And that's a budget buster. The moment you buy takeout food for a whole family, you've totally killed your grocery budget for the month.
That's so true.
So I like to have some like well-sourced, good ingredient sausages, right, that are quick, or spend a little more money and have some frozen grass-fed burgers. You can get those at Costco, right? And so that's, like, really, really quick for us to just throw on our griddle and just even if you stick a quick list of 5 ideas on the inside of a cupboard, like, "Here's my uh-oh list," and then you can pull on that instead of ordering takeout. I think that's a really good way to also, like, give you some confidence. Like, I can stick to this plan. Like, I can do this because I have a plan. It took me 5 minutes to scribble on a little sheet of paper and stick it to the inside of my cupboard, but I can level up our nutrition, and I don't have to have a wave the white flag day.
Yeah, I love that. One cool story that I saw as I've been following you is that your son wrote a cookbook. What is the story behind your son writing the cookbook?
Man, I have such a cool job, Militia. Like, it's so amazing to be working online and rub shoulders with incredible people all over the world. So it's gotta be 10 years ago now. A couple different bloggers said, "Well, my husband and I both work in the business and we have these kids and we don't know anyone in our real lives who like mirrors that entrepreneurial venture, particularly with
Mhm.
husband and wife together." So we ended up with 5 to 7, I think, families where both husband and wife were working online and we had
Mhm.
kids and we would all get together twice a year for masterminds. Literally like the biggest Airbnbs in the country because there were 24 kids. Like, these were not, like, two-child families. So there were, like, 24 kids, 14 adults, a couple babysitters, and we would just kind of work on each other's businesses and be social, and out of that, one time when we got together, the kids were poking at things, and they were making up weird pancakes, and they were, like, serving us meals, and one of the moms who'd already written a cookbook, Katie of Wellness Mama, said, "What if the kids wrote a cookbook?"
Mm,
And that was the beginning of a crazy adventure for, like I think the kids were 9 through 12 at that
wow.
time. It was the oldest from each family who just by circumstance were the ones who got to write that book.
Wow, that's amazing. Was it easy for them to come up with recipes, or how did they figure that out?
No, I mean, it was so interesting. They were all so very different. So I know one of the kid authors would create her own recipes. Maybe two, maybe both the girls
Mm,
were like really adept at creating their own recipes. Whereas my son is more of like a rule follower, a little bit more left brained kind of guy. And so he'd be like, "Well, what does mom make?" And I'll change out one seasoning or a couple. So his recipes are a lot of just like a small shift
mm,
on things that we already made, but he still had to he had to figure out how to make them his own. Sometimes he had to make things multiple times to get it right, and then we worked with recipe testers too. So he'd have to send his recipe off to a couple of families, and they'd make it and let him know how it went, and it was an amazing learning process of just communicating with people. He's like, "Well, what do I do? They haven't gotten back to me in 2 weeks." I said, "Grown-ups don't always do what they say they'll do either, dude. Like, you gotta email
wow.
politely." Incredible learning experience for him, but not easy.
Yeah, that is amazing. I think that would be so fun to just see your kid engage with food, number 1, in such a detailed way that he had to really put so much intention and thought behind it because at that age, I'm sure that made him appreciate the meals that you were making more and the meals that were on the table. He's like, I know what goes into this now.
I do, yeah, I do think so. He's 19 now, and we look back at, the book published in 2020, which meant all the media was where he was, like, on TV, but he was standing here at my desk. Um, but we look back and we're like, "Was that real? That's so crazy. You wrote a book."
That is crazy. That's so fun. So now your kids are older. I mean, 19, starting to leave the house, start their own lives. What are the things that you hope your teens leave the house knowing about health and wellness?
Mm, everything. Right? Like, not to be too repetitive, but the idea that food impacts how you feel is huge. The habit of eating a lot of vegetables and making sure that that's a part of your life and most of your meals. The idea that you can cook real food on a budget, because we'll talk about that sometime. Here's how much this costs, and here you
Right.
guys know what DoorDash costs, like, uh,
Right.
my son, the 19-year-old, he actually works with our local theater program, and so just Saturday,
Mm.
he ran what's called a 6-hour theater for 6th through 8th graders, and that included lunch, and they would just always order pizza, and he said, "Mom, I think with the pizza, I'm gonna cut up some salad and carrots and cucumbers and veggies and stuff." And I was like, "That's my kid!" So yeah, all of that, really,
Mhm.
and just the confidence too,
Mhm.
that I can do this. If something goes slightly awry in my health, if I'm starting to feel yucky, like, I can figure this out. Me and Google and mom figure out something to do rather than just running to the doctor. I think
Yeah.
that's an incredible empowering tool.
Yeah. And you've really focused on skills with your kids, right? So that they are kind of empowered to problem solve, to do things for themselves. Not that is like a huge problem if they don't have those skills. I mean, just take for example the cooking skills. Even if they know they're supposed to eat a lot of vegetables, how are they going to do that if they don't know how to cook them or prepare them or cut them up?
Right, exactly, and knowing those skills, I think, has increased my kids' confidence,
Mm.
and self-esteem, and so that's one bucket. So they have more self-esteem in social situations and in academic situations too.
Yeah. Anything else on your heart that you really want to share with mamas listening today?
Oh, that's always the hardest question. Um, I mean, keep it up. I work with a lot of parents of picky eaters as well, and so whether it comes to making small changes, don't give up on yourself,
Mm.
right? When it comes to presenting a variety of foods, if you're hearing me say like, "Oh, my kids eat lots of vegetables," and you're like, "Yeah, whatever, not my house." It
Mm.
Just keeping it up and continuing to expose your kids to those foods and trusting that God created our bodies to eat good
Mm.
things, and that, yes, the culture and food marketers are trying to really screw that up, but we can always get our kids back on track, by continuing to be consistent with what you know in your heart is right.
Yeah. Are you excited about kind of the direction our country is taking with more awareness about healthy food and healthy living?
I hope so. I'm cautiously optimistic.
Yes.
I mean, it seems like all pendulums swing back and forth, right? And so we have swung about as hopefully as far as we can get into the fake foods, and I'm thrilled to see it coming back. But the caution comes with, like, for example, parents have gotten the message kids shouldn't drink their sugar. That's awesome. However, food marketers stepped in and got in the way of, hey, we should just drink water, which would be a great pendulum shift, and been like, "Oh, Gatorade Zero. Oh,
Mhm.
artificially sweetened prime, blah, 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 blah." And I'm like, "Oh, we were so close to shifting that correctly, and now it's just, like, hit a wall, and all
Yeah.
the kids are drinking artificial sweeteners, which is chemicals and not real
Yeah.
food." So I'm cautiously optimistic. I do think we're heading in a better direction, but it's gonna be a big journey to shift this barge. It's a big, heavy barge to turn around.
Yeah, I agree. Cautiously optimistic as well. I
Mm.
do think that even just talking about some of the issues that we're talking about today is a huge win. Whereas, people weren't even aware or talking about a lot of things that we, know now are not good for us. So we got to take the wins.
Absolutely. Awareness and conversation is a huge win.
Yeah. And how can people keep learning from you and keep in touch with you?
Well, you can find me at that ye old blog, kitchenstewardship.com, for all the things that help parents keep their sanity. And then Kids Cook Real Food is really the hub of Healthy Kids and where we teach kids to cook. I have a podcast there too, just how to help parents raise healthy, independent kids and teach life skills and all the good stuff.
Love it. Awesome. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate what you do, and thanks for mentoring me for all these years.
I love that.
Thanks for listening to today's episode on the Daily Wellness Podcast. We hope that you found it helpful for your own wellness journey. And if so, we'd love for you to leave a review. Then come back and listen for review shoutouts on upcoming episodes. For more information, check out the show notes and connect with us on our website, dailywellnesscommunity.com.